Okay, well, I'm halfway through the obstacle scene now, and here's what's happened so far. I closed the last scene with a plot stress of 26. I had to add another 5, so my plot stress was at 31, which is uncomfortably high at the start of the scene. I rolled my 3 scene qualities and got a 0, 6, a 19, and a 94 for a wilderness. Those are respectively a taiga, tundra, or desert, which is a little off for the mountainous terrain that we expect, but stick with me, because the next one, the 19, is a canyon or chasm. And then the 94 is unstable or hazardous. So that gives me a pretty broad, pretty good interpretation. Unstable and hazardous and chasm fit right into the mountainous terrain. I reinterpreted the taiga tundra desert to just mean it's desolate. There isn't much anything growing there. It's just kind of rocky, nasty territory. And that's not going to be a very nice scene for Gortais to be in, but it's lots of opportunity there. So I picked my 3 skills. I'm going to make this an obstacle scene. So I need to do 3 at least moderately difficult skill checks for Gortais and have to ask for trouble 3 times in order to close the scene successfully. I figured those 3 things would be first a wayfinding roll, that is to make sure that Gortais manages to stay on the path and not get lost. I could see the potential consequence for that being losing a fair amount of time and supplies as he spins his wheels trying to get to where he's going. The second one would be a climbing roll, where he'd usually be at a disadvantage, but thanks to the window dressing that's coming up, the pack that I managed to get from Ray and Orikos, I filled up with all sorts of gear, including rope and pythons and a hammer and all sorts of climbing gear. So he's going to have a bonus there, at least to get him up to 50-50. And then finally, I decided there would have to be a hardy roll, or else potentially take a level of fatigue. So those were the 3 things I thought of for the skill challenges for this scene, starting off. Then I rolled to go ahead and see if there would be an unexpected event. And with a 31 plot stress to open up, of course there is. Fortunately, when I rolled the unexpected event, it came up with a result that was not applicable, so I could drop it and at the same time drop plot stress to half, rounding down, which is 15, which is much more comfortable. By the way, the unexpected event was which was it? It was the trait random, and the focus for that was a person or ally. Because there was no ally on the scene, a random trait means you roll a d20 on the trait table and just have an ally or a person on the scene exhibiting whatever that particular trait happens to be, even if it's not in line with their usual behavior. Fortunately, that didn't happen, couldn't be applied because there were no persons and no allies on this wilderness scene. So plot stress is down, and I went ahead and got started with my wayfinding roll, and I botched it big time. Decided that meant that Gortais spent a day trying to figure out where he was going and how to get there, and wandered around in circles trying to get to this kind of chasm area that's on the way to getting toward the viney, jungly area where he's to do his research. So that was a fail, but he lost some supplies. So far, so good. I decided because of that, he would need to make the hardy roll, and I switched that around with the climb, in order to see that he manages to keep up his good spirits, and that extra night unanticipated with doing a lot of wandering may have worn him out. Fortunately, I rolled low enough that he made his hardy roll, and it was a 50-50 chance of success. So that gave Gortais one of his 3 skill check successes that he needed for succeeding in the scene. So next thing, I decided that Gortais at that point reached the canyon and would be able from there to see if, figure out how to navigate that canyon. And that's where I decided he would have to make the climbing roll. But before that, before getting to the climbing roll, I kind of figured I'd need to apply the scene qualities and all of that. I decided first to ask for trouble because a canyon or chasm seems like a good place for goblins or something nastier to hang out. So I asked for trouble saying, "Is there something in the canyon?" And rolled really high, so no, there isn't. I got one of my asking for troubles out of the way. So I'm one skill check and one ask for trouble closer to succeeding or getting a meaningful success for the obstacle scene. Next, I'm going to put together what I need to do for the climb check. I'll do that live now so that you can get an idea of the thought process that goes through. But for the climb, usually Gortais's climb would be, let's see, it falls under athletics, which is an untrained skill for Gortais, so his untrained is -1. He's unlikely to succeed. However, he has the backpack, what he's got for his backpack that I decided he could get from Rain Oricos as part of his structured questions for persons. I filled that sucker up with rope and with climbing gear and with food and water and with a hammer and pythons and with extra arrows and a spare knife, a pan that can double up as a stew pot, fire starting gear, a nice warm wool blanket, and warm other clothes. I even toyed with the idea of saying, well, maybe I can stuff some armor into that purchase, and then decided that was a bit of an overreach and armor can cause all sorts of skill checks. So I decided against that, but we've got everything else. So Gortais has a base -1 untrained for the climb, but I'm giving a +1 for the window dressing of the hammer and pythons. The chasm itself and the desolate is not going to affect that climbing check. The chasm is there, so he can make a climbing check. But the unstable and hazardous ground is a problem. That's a magical scene quality that's going to count against Gortais. So that's going to make him unlikely to succeed. And because of the scene quality magic, I can't give any bonuses to make it more likely. And it's a magical headwind I've got that doesn't let me change the 50-50 base I'm on. So I've got a 35% chance of success. I have to think of a consequence in case he does not make the skill check. I would say the consequence is that he'll have to do a follow-on nimble check to avoid taking damage. And with that nimble check, if he botches that, he'll take a level of damage. But alongside the nimble check, he will also likely lose some of his rope and climbing gear. And that sounds like a fair enough consequence. So here we go with my 35%. And I rolled an 18. He, despite the unstable environment, manages to get down into the canyon with his climbing gear safely. Also, and this is another stroke of luck, plot stress was up to 17 after it dropped from the unexpected event, and I rolled an 18. So I just missed it. That gives me a +1, so my plot stress goes up to 18, but it doesn't trigger an unexpected event. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to play out the rest of the scene, and then I'll be back to describe what it is I've done. Now I'm going to be able to describe the rest of the scene because it got a little amusing. So I made the climb check with flying colors. At the bottom of the canyon, as it turned out, I had to retrofit something that I screwed up on. I thought that I missed the plot stress. I actually triggered it by 1. I forgot that the climbing check added 1 to my plot stress, so it was 18, and I got an 18. So it dropped to 9, and I had at the bottom of the canyon, as I got toward the bottom, Gortais had an encounter. However, the encounter was with some goats. I'll spare you the details, but I rolled up a random foe and got animals and tried one. It wasn't cows and it was goats. So then, after toying for a bit because his food was down on whether to maybe stock up on some goat stew for that evening, I decided it's a family recording, so I didn't do that. Instead, I asked for trouble a second time to say, is there a master goat herd? I kind of figured, this is like the story of the Cyclops, so that would be a way to introduce a foe, and the answer to that was no, at least not here. So after that, I figured, well, there'll be a way for Gortais maybe to get back out of the canyon if he follows where the goats go. So I had him successfully make a tracking skill check, and with that, he managed to see where the goats had driven a path going up the other side of the chasm, and managed to follow that out. I asked for trouble for a third time as well by saying, is the way stable? Which plays up again against the scene quality of unstable or hazardous, and that again came out against, it was a factor against Gortais. That reduced the likelihood from 50-50 to only 35%. It was unlikely to be true. However, I rolled a 0-2, so that was not a problem. The way the goats went into and out of the canyon on the far side was stable as an aircraft carrier. The only thing was that did trigger another unexpected event. That other unexpected event was another foe. So that foe ended up being a big brute. So I suspect, while not being a cyclops, it was some sort of giant or large humanoid. I figured that at this point, hey, Gortais had gotten his 3 skill checks and his 3 asking for troubles out of the way. So I didn't really want to mix it up with combat. So the first thing I had to do was make an opposed notice. And Gortais' notice is a +2. The brute had a +1 with a special ability, which wasn't relative to detection. So it was likely to succeed for Gortais. I rolled low, so Gortais managed to see the big brute first. And then I figured I'm going to use this scene quality that I've kept rolling against of unstable or hazardous to my advantage, and just said, is there a place where Gortais can go where he will have unstable ground between him and this big brute so that he won't be able to engage in combat? And I figured that I got a yes to that, and I needed a wayfinding in order to see if I could track a way to get around so that the brute couldn't close the gap. And so Gortais very happily happens to see some large humanoid shape that's further off in the distance and gets up on one ridge and it's up on another ridge, and he can thumb his nose at it all he wants. The other thing, whether it ever sees him or not, is not going to be able to catch him. And that's where I was able to have my 3 skill checks, my 3 asking for trouble. I can close the obstacle scene, and I did so successfully by rolling against plot stress, which is all the way down and that's it for the scene. It was a pretty easy success without a lot of setbacks for Gortais. So now we'll move on to the next scene, which I will try as an encounter scene just to see if we can make that happen. Chances are it'll be way in over his head just for one character, but the Artanes setting is a pulpy setting, so there may be a chance, if I get creative, that I might be able to defeat a foe. And I will cut out and be back in a moment.